I would want to start this workshop. And one of the things that I would want to put across is the fact that, yes, we are good scientists. We try very hard and we do well, particularly on matters of research at community level. But the most difficult thing is that when we have done that hard work and we have engaged ourselves with resources to do research, where do we take our output in research? They remain on the shelf, but we share them with the public. Who is our audience? But who is our critical audience for impact in research? So the worst thing that has ever happened is we do research, but they're not impactful. So we do them for paper. Once we get our master's degrees, then we publish it here if the list of publications that we have, then it ends there. I've always said and told many of my peers that it is not the efforts made that is critical. It is the results obtained that is critical. So what is the results? You could be doing a lot of work, but it's going in cycles. You spiral within the cycles. You are really cooking inside, but you don't see the movement or the impact or what people feel about your research. That is why we thought that it is important to look at how do we translate all these good researches, active policies? How do we use them to influence the policymakers and decision makers in government to ensure that as we do research, then the research is impactful for the users. And the users here are the members of the public for which you define the statement of the problem for your research. If you say that you want to look for a solution on how to manage diabetes, for example, when I did a study and I say, I'm coming up with a title, I'm calling it psychosocial correlates in the context of type 2 diabetes management and application. I mean, within the concept of physical activity and dietary pattern and application of structural equation techniques on campus. You see, when you do that, it is really a serious title. When it is read and you are standing up to go to the podium to be awarded PhD, Dr. Mary, you walk there majestically because you have acquired a PhD with a strong title. But what was the focus? The focus was we have not focused on the mental health tailored communication model for type 2 diabetes. And so we need them to be considered from their mental status. But then it ended in the library at Same University, and it has also ended in the papers. And again, we have it in a book. How many people read books? And if they read, is it useful? So we then it's important that such good results, which has handpicked, can then be used to influence policy. The good advantage we have as the two of us, for those who look at the time, is that we have been the game of policy and also regulation for many years, since 2012. And we believe that if then we can translate this to be impactful, we can have some other seats at this side, so we can come this side. Then it will be very useful. Now, I want to say that research is important. Translating it into policy is the results of it. And so I'll be taking us through the preliminaries, and then after that, Professor Mukta will take us through the interventions. But what I want to say is we have done training translating research into policy. I think we have gone with about delegates of 10 to Bayero University. Those are heads of departments from 6 universities. And we went through this program. And the main aim was for us to translate it to all of us. That is when it's we cannot cover the entire policy workshop because it was a 1 week workshop. Professor Nguka and I were facilitators together with our team from Bayero University. And I can assure you that we'll just give you a brief of it. In the future, we shall organize for a complete workshop on how to translate results in the policy, which can be about 1 year, so that you can benefit a lot from it. And we have about 10 of us trained already in Kenya. So let me take you through this process. And I want to take you through introduction to policy as a brief. What is the objective of this? We think that by the end of this workshop, we should be able to understand the workings of government. The working of government. You know, when you are doing policy, the person you should have in mind is, when you're influencing policy, you should have in mind government. A country is run by government, although we have government support. So the focus at the epicenter should be government. Then we have factors that make government act or not to act. When government tells you that when I come to power tomorrow, everything must be bottoms up, and they tell you, okay, we will make sure that you, the border that is down there, is going to have easy time. Now, that is very good. That is very good. But are there policies already in place to guide that process? So you cannot start blaming that government if the technical advisor didn't have instructions in terms of policy of how to implement that. You can't wake up one day as a president and say, today, I'm going to make things bottom up. You will meet a lot of obstacles because you don't have a working framework. And the working framework are existing grounded policies for that. And so you will shout, this government said in 100 days, they will have turned things from bottom to up and from up to bottom, whichever direction. But did they have policies in place? This is where the missing link is. And you and I should know why governments do or not. Then we also want to interrogate the concept of public policy analysis and identify the scope and limitation of public policy. And then differentiate the topologies of public policies. That is the types of public policies. So I will pass there and go straight to introduction. State exists to serve citizens. Is it true? Government exists to serve citizens through the machineries of government. Now, if you look at the Kenyan government, for example, we have 3 arms of government: the executive, the parliament, and also the judicial. Now, all these arms of government are supposed to work independently, but interactively. Are we together? So that forms the state. And so you'll find that if you're a government agency, then you are a state agency by that context. Though some government agencies are aligned to work together with the executive. For example, the Ministry of Health as an executive has a number of agencies, parastatals, sagas, regulatory authorities working under them. But it does not mean that those agencies must serve the Ministry of Health. They're serving the state. Are we together? So we need to understand that all governments aim to develop their societies and gain legitimacy. Thus, they embark. And I can say that, let me minimize this so that embark on the generation of economic growth. So the main agenda for government to move forward is economic growth. Now, if you look at Kenya now, we are at the stage where we are trying to work very hard, but we are not headed somewhere yet. Why? It's because we have a lot of good people, strong people, but we miss the link. And the link here is how strong people can advise those in power. And you and I, we are here to advise that power, so that the overall result is the economic growth for you and I in the society. So we have provision of education and healthcare, reducing inequalities improving the living standards of people, and combating corruption and many other development initiatives. That is the main purpose for government to exist. And even if we talk like the whole year about nutrition and food systems, if we cannot make sure that they address these issues of government, it will be null and void, because then we are not helping the society from a government's perspective. It is about economic growth. And you know that the measurement of government economic growth is about the GDP. So if the government cannot increase their revenue source and serve the people, then your business of science does not make sense. And that is why we need to have things. This they do through public actions together with the NGOs. In other words, emphasis on policy initiatives is the official goals and activities of government. And so the implementation of mechanisms of government is facilitated through making decisions and policies. And you'll find that one government can spend 5 years just doing policies. And after they have done the policies, a different government comes in and they nullify all the policies and they come up with new policies. And it will be a cycle of policies and papers, but no action. Now, how do you make sure that they're actionable? I think that's something that we need to look at. We are told that government's positive and negative impacts can be felt by the type, the quality, also effectiveness and efficiency of policies. Effectiveness is meeting the results or outputs. And efficiency is utilization of resources to serve the people. However, we know that successful policy formulation or implementation and analysis cannot be achieved without planning. So there must be proper plan for such policies. And of course, that question comes, can you mention any government policy you have affected or you have come across in your workplace? There are so many of them. We can list thousands of policies in Kenya. The next question would be, are they useful policies? Now, it is important to understand the concept of public when we are talking about policy, because most of the time, policies are made for the public. And so public comprises that the dimension of human activity, which is regarded as requiring government or societal regulations or intervention, or at least common action. And so it could also mean the citizens of the state, you and I in the state. That is public, who participate in political and social processes at least, and the public sphere. And now when you talk of political, I can assure you that the academia cannot achieve their goals without knowing the politics of academics in influencing policy. And so you cannot run away from politics if you're an academician. And I'm talking about good politics, because you may come up with interesting studies, but then if you cannot influence it and penetrate into the politics up to the point where we have the parliament, executive and judicial brought involved, you cannot excel with your policies. In other words, public also means more than half of the population of a state. When you talk about majority of the population of a state, that becomes the public. Sometimes I've had defined this concept, particularly for the Office of the Auditor General, when sometimes they say that, don't you think KDI should be audited by Auditor General? I tell them, you know, this was a professional board made up of fellow staffs. And for the Office of the Auditor General to audit, there must be exchequer. And if there's exchequer money, then there must also be a service being provided to more than half of the Kenyan population. And I don't think Kenya has, we are only doing it for 12,500 and a few people. So we don't qualify for that matter. And you know, that does not make sense for some of these people, because then they don't understand the context. But we can make them understand that context as academia. And we tell them public means more than half of the population being served. That's why government is called the state. Now they say, okay, but you are dealing with public money. You are getting from professionals. So the professionals have a way of oversighting the public money. You get that? So then it means the context of public must be understood by the academia, even in other realms of policy. Public policies are public because government authorities, bodies, and officials make and develop them. Now, if KNDI comes up with a policy today, it will affect almost all the entire population. Now, on service delivery, because children come from households and they want to pursue nutrition and dietetics in the university and colleges. And if they don't pass the minimum grade, they have to have KNDI for quality. So that affects the entire population, but not in terms of resource allocation, because there's no exchequer. So you see, so when we are here, we are also part of the policy that your research should inform. I will pass there and go straight to, there's so many definitions of policy. When we share this, you'll get them. But I want to go to elements of public policy analysis. When you talk of public policy analysis, we must think in the context of goals and objectives. Any policy must have a purpose, goal, and objective. A policy that does not have a goal or expected outcome is not a policy. And most of the policies don't have head and tail. They are done with interest in mind, and particularly when somebody would want to suppress others, they come up with a policy. And there's no purpose for it, there's no goal for it. Goals should be broad, general in nature, with objectives and more specific, that are more specific and particular. Goals should be realistic and attainable, but also challenging. So anytime we come up with the public policy goals, they are the end results which indicate problem resolutions or need. And this is the need of the population. So which means that for you to set proper goals and with the policy, there must be proper needs assessment. And needs assessment encompasses evidence-based research. And so if you want to assess a need and you're doing it with service providers and you leave the academy, then you miss out on the technical input of the academy. So that needs base is what brings us here. I have done a study. I have come up with results. I want to influence policy on nutrition-sensitive agriculture. Therefore, I should be part of the process of formulation of that policy at a critical stage of stakeholders' recognition. But sometimes we don't see that happen with our studies. So objectives need to be achieved for goals to be realized. Then we also have elements such as alternative policies. Alternative policies are necessary for attaining the broad goals. Where a policy is being formulated, there should be alternative policies. If we initiate this policy, what is the opportunity cost for this policy vis-a-vis the existing? When you are coming up with the competency-based curriculum, for example, what is the opportunity cost of that compared to the usual 844 system? You must do that kind of analysis so that you can now position your policy to move forward and then invite the technical expertise. And then we should look at the relationship between policies and goals. Policies decided upon have to relate to the goals that have been set. Note that the goal is on one end and the policy structures or statements are on the other end. They must be focusing towards one end. And then there must be a conclusion. As regards the policies to be adopted, a valid conclusion in a policy is drawn as to which policy or policy should be adopted. So when you do policy analysis, you must end up with a conclusive statement on what kind of policy you want to adopt in any society. Of course, the scope looks at multidisciplinary nature, and of course, many other things like changes in scale and complexity. And in the analysis, you see that you have to go deeper into technical borrowing so that you can come up with statements that will then allow you to have one single policy you want to pursue. in the analysis process. So that is just a brief of the stakeholders analysis. But we know that all policies have limitations. And some of the limitations is the relative rather than absolute definitions of societal issues and problems may prevent their resolution. As relative differences, we always have a way of highlighting inequalities in societies. When we talk about absolute definition of societal issues, sometimes they become subjective. And so you'll find a subjective approach informing an objective outcome of a policy. And subjectivity would mean that somebody sits down in their house and they think, oh, how do I want to start this policy? Let me go and sell this idea to the people. And they come up and say, okay, we have a policy here. We want to come up with, we want to make sure that it's working. And they sit in a room with 10 people and they come up with that policy. And they impose that policy to be adopted, including the academy. And then they call stakeholders and they have a one-day or couple-day workshop. And they say that now it has been approved and it becomes a policy. Nobody understands what that policy entails. We have problems of increasing expectation on the government role. Government work with people and they define within the scope, but sometimes people expect too much from government. I can assure you that some of the policies that government come up with are focused towards government delivery. However, we should also be thinking of our own initiative in our own position to deliver towards policies. If an NACADA policy comes, it says, okay, it controls the use of drugs, and it defines on which drugs are harmful or not. Why should you wait for a policeman to inform the neighbor that the drug they're using is going to affect them? So we need also to be part of that process. But we expect too much from government when also we can initiate the process. And then we have now what we call the public policy analysis expert. May not be an expert in politics. So academia may not be good in politics. So however much their research is interesting and has better output, if you don't know the games of politicians, you cannot sell your idea. So you must build the competency of being a politician to push the agenda. Last time we were in parliament with Professor Nguka, and we were facing Committee on Health. We started by telling them, you know, one of the things that we do at KNDI is that, first of all, we don't beg. And we are not in squatters. And we have everything under one roof. And the next time you have an assignment to do for the speaker, for parliament, the speaker of the National Assembly, don't take it to Mombasa. You can bring it to KNDI so that you can pay us the money and involve your activities. But we are making a mistake. Because then a lot of wastage on the efficiency is outside the offices, in hotels, still discussing relevant policies. When you can sit here and discuss relevant policies at a cheaper cost. And you know, they were laughing, but they said, people seems to be doing very interesting things. You should be given money so that you work. And then we tell them, we don't want your money. Can you be given money and you don't want it? Because we know that we have the money from the expertise who is you and the professor sits here for 1 week and I pay him nothing. He has already spent money on behalf of politics. You get me? So we need to be experts that have skills on influencing politicians. So politics of nutrition and dietetics is critical. Politics of academia is also critical. Then we have some characteristics of public policy analysis, flexibility. Every policy that does not work can be changed. And so we need to allow flexibility anytime we come up with policies. Flexibility also means that you can allow the government to sell their manifesto. Sometimes you come up with policies, but they are saying, how will it fit into Kenya Kwanza manifesto? How will it fit into ODM, for example, if they were the one leading the government? So you have to be flexible to adopt the manifesto of our government. Because after all, you're working for a state, even if you are an academia, you're participating for a state, but with the technical input. Then the purpose geared towards goal realization and not chance cards. They emerge in response to policy demands. You know, the worst thing that ever happened to the world, for example, is the COVID case. People were erratic and they came up with a number of policies that didn't make sense. And it only took 2 years and it's now dead. It has wasted the entire world's resources. Why? Because we did not have structures in place before which are working to respond to COVID. And so we became erratic. There was no purpose for any policy for COVID because after all, people didn't understand it anyway. And then clarity. It should be very clear and consistent and steady with people's agenda. So when you're coming up with such policies, you need to consider that. Then we have the aspect of documentation must be documented by being written. And of course, implementers and the targets well enlightened on the goals and expected outcome of the policy. So when you write a policy, you must enlighten those who are going to implement it. How many times have we come up with many sessional papers in Kenya that some of them have never seen light of the day in the discussions, many times. Why? Because the documentation is there, but the implementers are not enlightened on it. You give a cabinet secretary a policy, the best they can understand is the brief of the statement of the policy, but not the details. And so most of the time, they will cascade that to the technical people. For example, the DG. And the DG can cheat the CS. Because you see, they have the expertise, and so they will tell you, no, this thing that has been written as X is actually W. And then they will say, okay, my DG, because of the technical expertise, said it's a W, so let's implement it. And then they will be asking, do you think what the DG is saying is correct? Yeah, that's correct, because the DG is also working with other people that are cheating the CS. And eventually it comes out that the CS didn't perform. So the president does reshuffle and says, okay, you are in health, now go to energy, transferring the same problem. Why? We are not fair enough to explain this. So fairness is important, and then conflicting policies also need to be considered. We have policies we come up with daily, but they also conflict with other existing policies. And then legal binding. So better policies should also be included in regulations and laws so that they are properly implemented. So there we just have a brief of the stage of policy, the stage of policy process. Of course, normally it starts with the needs assessment, and that is where you have the problem identification, then agenda setting, then we have policy formulation, then policy adoption, and then implementation, and then evaluation of the policy. Now, all this is a government agenda, but then you as the academia and I, we must input into the value chain of the processes in the cycle. So we need to look at that. Types of policies, we look at them in terms, depending on the range and time limits, what they set out to achieve, the source and the scope and the diversity, who are they affecting? And these policies are not mutually exclusive. You can have all these considered together. Now, my question is, when we do policies and we inform government, do we do them for posterity? Or do we do them for a government who is in place? For example, we have only 3 years for Kenya Kwanza government. If they go and another government comes, will we change the policies again to focus on the manifesto? Or do we need to have a long-standing policies that can affect the generation to come? It is the academia to give direction. If we don't do it, they will not do it for us. They will move with their manifesto. And the agenda here is selling my idea in the government. So we have different types of policy. We have those that are outcome based. For the output policies, they are essentially policies and activities by the government. And the outcome ones, sometimes called impact policies. They look at what is the impact we are likely to have in this. No one ever told us about the competency-based curriculum in the next 15 years. I was talking to the TVET, the SINDAC group here, and I was asking them, yes, you're coming up with a curriculum. But then we have class 8s, class 7s that are already in the old system. Are we prepared enough to uptake that curriculum and fit them into the existing systems that we already have? Or are we going to, again, do competency-based for nutrition to align to the new entry group coming? Are we prepared? So all these things, the impact needs to be assessed so that any policy that comes, you must have impact assessment for the future. And many of us focus more on output. Output is like, can you tell us in the last 3 months, your 3 key indicators of achievements? What have you done in the past 3 months? Once you submit that to your boss in authority, they say we have performed well because we have achieved 1, 2, 3, 4. So it is paper-based achievement because you're only looking at the output, but there is their impact. So then we need to look at policies from those perspectives. Again, when we are looking at other policies, we look at the incentive versus regulatory. And so in the incentive is the carrot end of policies or program explicitly designed to promote and encourage a change in the behavior of the target in the desired way. The essence of coming up with competency-based curriculum, for example, was to come up with students that will have good skills to help themselves. That is the incentive. But there was no impact assessment for it. That is why, and preparedness. That is why a primary school teacher will be telling children, tomorrow we are cooking eggs. So each child must come with 2 crates of eggs. And alongside it, carry 2 hens. So after you have done, you have prepared egg, you now slaughter the chicken. Is that the objective? Is that going to make the child better when they come out of that school? Now you ask the people in the curriculum development, they say it is really working. But it is also putting pressure on the society. So the impact is actually negative. So that policy is a bad policy. And nobody is telling the government that it's a bad policy. The academia is very concentrated in the library. They are writing papers and they say, PMC, peer-reviewed journal, new publication for, okay, I see them every day, new publication from Buka. Yes, it's good, but is there impact on that? Are you using it to tell these people you are wrong here? We need to look at that. Then we have the regulatory, the stick end of policies or program, explicitly designed to regulate, control, and discourage, and ensure that the target conforms to certain forms of behavior or code of conduct. Regulatory policies prevent unwanted consequences in the interests of public. Regulatory policies also may benefit others and inhibit some due to choices. What kind of policies do we call regulatory? When you come up with a policy and you say, now we need to talk to the Minister of Health, for example, you now put this as a public policy. Then they now create a regulation or a law. So if it's a public health issue, they're saying, well, let's anchor it in Public Health Act. And they set up that regulation. If it is to do with nutrition, they ask KNDI, what are you doing about the food regulation? Can you come up with a food regulation policy so that they can, we can have it published as legal notice to re-emphasize on the implementation. So that is regulatory in nature. They are the best policies when it comes to implementation, because when you violate a law, then you're liable for conviction. And then we have the distributive and redistributive policies. In the distributive one, a small number of people benefit from the collective policy and programs, just like the government of shareholding. See, you have just a clique of 5 who are running with resources. And any policy they come up with is to benefit from them. So then they don't consider whether people are suffering or not. For example, and to be honest, if you come up with heavy taxation, for example, heavy taxation, now you stop people from doing business. For example, we want to improve nutritional status. I remember when there was fish imposing of tax on fish importation, even as much as we would want to have our own. My submission was that you cannot impose tax on fish if people are consuming it. Why? Because 1, you will affect the protein malnutrition, nutritional status. Because now we cannot produce enough fish for everybody, and they are expensive in Kenya compared to what is coming. But you see, they did that and it went through, and now they stopped importing fish. So we don't have it in the country. Now, they used to receive 200 million income tax per month in Kenyan government. They don't get it anymore. Those that were supposed to produce fish are not doing it. And so they are not also supporting the government agenda through taxation. So people have run away from paying tax now. And so the government doesn't have money. So you tax people more. And when you do that, it is a bad policy because then only a few people benefit. Others are suffering. And you end up collecting nothing. But if you lower the tax, then many people will be happy to pay the tax. And you'll be having enough resources to run the country. People don't tell them that. And then the expertise who are there are silent in the libraries. So then, what are we doing as a country? Then we have left the people to sit around table and say, where utakula gani, where utakula gani, where utakula gani. Once they do that, okay, now I think what we need to do, let's lobby the leader of majority and give them something so that we can push this agenda. And in 1 minute, they pass it. But what about the impact? No one looks at that. Only a few people benefit. Then there is distributive one. This type involves the transfer of resources for benefits such as money, rights, and power among large groups and classes of people. Practically, it means taking from A and giving it to B. Okay? Knowing very well that Nyanza did not vote for me, I will take all the resources from Central that voted for me and take it to Nyanza. So that next time they embrace me when I come there. What is the impact? So you come up with a policy and say, okay, let's redistribute this. So everybody will benefit from this government, even the one that didn't vote for you. And you say, okay, all resources, Nyanza. So you find a group of people making money there and they stay there for a whole month. That is redistributing. And that is now internal policy that has nothing to do with the public. Then we have substantive. Denotes what governments are doing to do such as construction of roads, hospitals, houses, schools. Substantive policies directly distribute to the people disadvantage and disadvantages, benefits and goals. So policies that are focusing on infrastructure and systems that will support humanity or human services. Those are substantive policies. For example, coming up with a regulatory authority for resource allocation for health hospital is basically a substantive nature of policy put in regulation. And then procedural as concerned with how and who of the policies. That is how it will be done, or who is to do it. It includes laws providing the creation of administration agencies like the KNDI and others, and determining the matters over which they have jurisdiction to perform. That is why you will see an executive order grouping together the legislative agenda for a common goal. It comes now to help with policies. So then, in this aspect of just introduction to policy, the most important here is that public policy is purposive, goal-oriented activities of government. So when you talk of public policy, it's purely a government agenda. So the academia can only input in that public policy. And so you must know how you build your skills to input. Then policy analysis is the process of discovering what governments do and do not do. why and the impact of their actions or inaction. So you must be very quick with what the government agenda is. And then examines and provides data on the causes and consequences of public policies. And then, of course, we know of the theories which are purely academia, evidence-based identification of societal problems where we come in decision-making. And evidence-based here means that your research must be a proper evidence to inform this. So if you do a study that no one can use it, sometimes when we examine students, we ask them, what is the one thing that this study will do to Kenyans? So particularly where you have studied. And they'll start scrambling, you know, here the user is the Minister of Health, the Minister of Agriculture, the Minister of Planning. What are you going to do for the Minister of Planning? It does not come out very clearly. Why? Because then we don't have good evidence to support the policy. Are we together? So it means that your evidence must be, if I finish this study and it is focusing on, let's say, sanitary towels distribution or farmer field schools, capacity building for young ones. By the time a student graduates from this institution, then they must be able to become self-reliant in terms of being good entrepreneurs. And you have given the strategy of how to do that based on the evidence of the study. If it was attitude that was a critical indicator for determining whether people adopt nutrition-sensitive agriculture techniques, then you have to now work on people's attitude. So you have to come up with a policy that will be looking at educating young ones to change their behavior characteristics. And that is why we need evidence from you to influence the policy. Then interrogate and provide recommendation to societal problems. Are we together? Does that sound like a good background? Before I invite Professor Nguka, I'll take you through now the real business of government agenda. Does it define a good background for policy? And do you see where the academia should come in the value chain of policy making, which is a government agenda? The academia is at the epicenter. Now, many of our governments fear academia. Why? Because they want easy people. Easy people. Easy people means that someone who has no skills to question. So if you question, then you become an enemy. They don't know that the questioning will actually improve the policy. Now, how do you penetrate that? As an academia, you must take your ground and say that we must be part of the process. Now, how? You must convince with the research. If you do a research that you went under a tree and collected data and wrote a thesis and came up with good conclusion, then it cannot influence any policy. So it must be accurate and evidence-based. And so if we ask you questions later, how did you collect the data? And what were the conditions for collecting the data? And what ethical consideration did you make? Don't feel offended because you feel like, why ask these questions? It's just to be sure that your data can inform policy by evidence, critical evidence. You want to clap for me? No, if you're clapping, you clap better. You want to clap for me? Yes, you can do that. You know, transitions are made by claps. So let me move to this. As I said earlier, we'll have this with Professor Nguka. And why are we having this? First of all, we have worked in the sector for government for now over 10, 13 years. Both of us. And we thought that it is necessary also to come up with an indication of how government works. When you talk of statutes, legal notices, then we think about the Kenya health sector, which is our own. We should be able to know how we position ourselves as an academic in this exercise. And I want to start by introduction. What you know best. The Constitution of Kenya upholds the principles of public participation and transparency under Article 10 of the Constitution on national values and principles of governance. That is for Kenya. And Article 27 asserts equality of everyone before the law, as well as the right to equal opportunities before the law. Unfortunately, sometimes in Kenya, some are more equal than others. This therefore means that everyone should be involved in decision-making or areas of governance, of government, such as policy. So the academia has to be involved by constitutional definition of the critical national values. So any government policymaker cannot leave the academia out of it if they want to be right with the implementation of policies. This therefore means that everyone should be involved. Now, access to information held by the state is allowed under Article 35, which means all citizens are empowered to obtain information they require. And in this regard, on policy and legislation. So if you feel that a policy is not in the correct state, you can ask for that policy and ask to review the policy and come up with your position by constitutional demands. So a group of academia can stand up and say, we don't like this policy and we want it reviewed, and we must be part of the process. Parliament is also directed by Article 118 of the Constitution to undertake the business in open manner, not with games that we have seen in Parliament, thereby allowing public access to its proceedings. In fact, Parliament is supposed to debate issues, not parties. So when an issue is brought by the speaker on the table, it's supposed to, or any member of Parliament, it's supposed to be debated. And you look at it from the public interest, not the party interest. Finally, Article 119 talks about the right of citizens to present any issue before Parliament. This could be a petition on a law requiring enactment, amendment, or repeal. So you, the academia, if you are left out in policies, you can write a collective petition to Parliament and tell them you want to talk about agriculture and how it is useful for the country. And then we want you to give us a date and we come for the presentation. They will do it. And they will allow you to present. And then you will tell them what you are implementing is wrong through your state agencies or through your executive agencies. And why? Because of 1, 2, 3. You can do that. From the foregoing there, it is apparent that the Constitution offers the foundation necessary to support the involvement of citizens in the policy development. Now, this structure cuts across all countries. If you read the Constitution of many countries, they uphold that concept of being allowed to participate. There has, however, been a transformation in the development of policy over time, with the country now moving to evidence-based policy development. If you look at the various documents, you'll see that they are looking at evidence to make policies by design, by written design. This means that one needs to back their policy proposals with evidence from research. The policy proposal has to come with evidence on why it is needed, the requisite resources for its development and implementation, and the amount of time it will take to develop the policy. And of course, examples of other jurisdictions which have developed a similar policy, we can have quite a number, and what benefit they have. So there has to be information that is well packaged to back up the proposed policy, showing the outcome of evidence. In simple terms, the policy proposal has to be accompanied by a policy brief. Now, politicians don't have time to read, and executives don't have time to read. If you do a 2-page or a 3-page document to an executive, and you want them to adopt your policy, they will not read it. They will give it to a technical person who has interest. And then the technical person, because of their interest, they see that they're going to lose per diem, they put it under the table. But if you make it a 1 sentence or a 1 minute or a 1-page document with pictures, you want to tell somebody about malnutrition in Asal region, let's say Mandela. You don't need to say so many words and talk about the Z-score index, this prevalence percent. You take one picture of a dying person, a dying child, and you say, Mr. President, if this child is left for 2 days, we'll die. This is critical malnutrition. You need us, and we are here. If you want us, we have time. We can come and now have a proper discussion. When they go in their mind, they will be seeing the picture of the child dying, and they will say, why don't we invite this group? They come and explain for us. So don't struggle with 2-page document for a policy. Madam CS, you're not doing well in this area. Just look at this child and this child, compare them. This is the state of nutrition in the country. And inside that picture, you have a prevalence for stunting and another one. It speaks 1,000 words in 1 minute with just few sentences. So a policy brief is a document that can sell. Now, we should look at, in Kenya, for example, the national government and the county government. Remember, Kenya has 48 governments. County governments are independent governments. The national government is the 48th government. When you are doing policies, you look at them from twofold, the national policies and the county policies. And most of the time, the county policies borrow from the national policies. But if the national policy itself left out the academia, then even the county policies will be fake policies. In the development policy of policies, the government has 2 institutions that have responsibility to provide guidance on policy development. We have the Kenya Law Reform Commission. Many of us are aware of. And the Kenya Institute of Public Policy Research and Analysis. Now, if you want to influence policy, these are 2 institutions you approach and tell them, we need this, I have done research. It is very impactful. This is the key results. We want you to influence, to put it in policy, help us develop a policy out of this. And you work together with them. And they will come up with policy and then even help you to move it to the right ministry where you're going to initiate the process. So don't say that we were not involved. You take your own initiative to look for these institutions. The citizens are free to approach these organizations to support. Now here we are talking about citizens. We're not talking about a group or academy. Any member of the society can do that. So if you have heard of KIPRA and KLRC, they exist. That's why they are created. Approach them. Now, relationship between policies and laws in Kenya, the ideal and recommended position in the legislative process is that policy precedes the formulation of a bill or any other legislative instrument. Now, before, it was the law that was coming first, then policies. Now, they are saying it is the policy first, then law. But that's a regulatory type of policy. Let's come up with this policy. Now, force agencies to develop regulations on this policy. The importance of developing a policy framework first is intended, among others, salient features, allow the executor to determine the clear roadmap. Where do you want to take the country forward? Then now you can come up with the laws. So it is also important for you and I in the legislative process to appreciate the necessity to formulate policy that will guide and clearly set out the best approach to dealing with the policy challenge at hand. And so it is important also to note that not all policy problems require legislative solutions. It is at the policy making level that all these issues can be canvassed by those discussing it, including you, the academy, and the details. Good. So In the stages of drafting laws in Kenya, I just go through them. I don't want to go into details. We know that the first stage is the initiation of a law. Somebody can come up with a law, either a state agency, let's say the ministry, can come up with a law. Also, a member of parliament can come up with a law, having read the laws and say, I want to change this law. Or you as a person, you can come up with a law and take it through member bill, through parliament. So the law initiation is for everyone. You can come up with a law. So if your study is so good and you have done meta-analysis and you have grounded the principles of meta-analysis to indicate that what you study and others study can now be useful for influencing policy, you can come up with a group and make a law out of it and approach a member of parliament and tell them, we want this law. Can you take it up for us as a member? It will be taken immediately. That is initiation. Then we have the drafting. Most of the time for government bills, the Attorney General drafts them. Sometimes for private bills, any lawyer can draft it. Then the bill should be taken to the Kenya cabinet, if it is from the ministry, to be discussed and given an okay for it to move forward. But for the personal bills, you can take them to the member, and then they will address it with the Speaker of National Assembly. Then there is the publication of those bills in a Gazette notice. Then we have the first reading, which takes place in Parliament, just read for people to know what is going on. And after the first reading, we have the second reading. This second reading can be read, and at that stage, they can give it to a committee relevant to look at it in detail and call for public participation and then formulate it. And then they take it to the committee stage. After the second reading, committee stage. And then after the committee stage is the third reading. And of course, the third reading is where they call it Committee of All House. At that stage, it's very difficult for you to bring down the bill because it's almost close to the presidential assent. Well, I mean, assent. And once it is signed into law, then the law commences immediately. So you can do that as a practitioner. Anybody can do that. There's nobody who was born with it. So you have studied and you want to help Kenya. You can team up and come up with policies that are going to be useful for the country. Good. So I would want to stop here, but I want to run you through what we do in the State Department for Public Health and Professional Standards. That is what the executive order gave for the State Department. I've struggled to explain to many people. You need to understand and read the executive orders and analyze it. It's not just a document that you say, the president signed, so everybody's on board. You must know how are you going to be on board. The executive order number 1 has all those. And I'm looking at number 8, develop a nutrition action plan. Is more relevant to Kenya Nutrition and Dietitians Institute and all professionals in nutrition. Are we involved as the academia? Now, let me tell you how the academia is involved when this is being developed. When the ministry is coming up with nutrition action plan, they agree as ministries and they come together. After that, they invite their friends who are academia. Tell them, come, we are doing this, you come and help us develop. And they don't look at the expertise. It's only friends who will indicate that they consulted with the academia. Those friends have no single publication. Or if they had, those publications have never met the threshold of impact. And then they come up with an action plan. Now, it takes 3 years. And you ask them now, what did you achieve in the action plan? Then they tell you, we have not done monitoring and evaluation, so we are not sure of how much it has impacted. Then they say, okay, we are coming up with another action plan in the next 2 years. This one has expired with no impact. Why? Because the people who made the policy were not part of the group that would also want it implemented. But you keep on wasting money and resources. So we need to look at that for us in our case. And we have critical stakeholders in it. And I would want you to know that I and our team in the council, we have categorized those institutions very well. I don't think there's any other board that has organized for that. It is us who categorize them to look at what the president did. And we say that we have professional bodies, which are also different. Those that are state corporations, like the Medical and Practitioners Board, Clinical Officer, Nursing Council. And of course, now we have the Pharmacy Symposium Board. We have 4 of them, categorized as state corporations. Those ones receive money from government, exchequer money, and staff from government. And they also do regulatory functions. Then we have agencies that are not categorized as state corporations, like the Psychologist Council, the physiotherapy, the clinical officer is now up, Kenya Medical Laboratory Technicians, health records, public health. Those are state agencies, regulatory agencies, but they are not getting exchequer money from government. So which means they have to look for their resources. And resources here include your technical expertise. But then we have Membership Regulatory Institute. There is only one. That is Kenya Nutritionists and Dietitians Institute. This one does not receive exchequer money, nor staff, nor building. 2 days ago, I was being asked, Daktari, you should be here in Mombasa. We are working on a budget for your institute. I said, how do you work on budget for my institution when I have not asked you for money? Why does the CEO doesn't want money? I said, the law does not allow us to get that money. So it's not the money you are giving, it's what the law says. So I take the money. Somebody later will say, go to court and say, Kenya got money, which is illegal. This one was created for members to come up with their expertise and their resources to run the agenda of nutrition in the country and support Kenya and other countries. And other countries here, we have Uganda coming up now. We have Tanzania. They have all expressed interest because their parliament cannot allow them to have it. And we have Somalia. And also Sudan, who are expressing interest. They regulated from Kenya. So we only need to amend to allow even outside boundaries within the framework of operations. So this act gives us the authority to come up with strategies on how to influence our policies, both in the agriculture sector, health sector, and any other sector like planning. And then we have the authorities. There are only 3. We have the Kenya Health Profession, or not professionals, but Health Profession Oversight Authority, and then the Nuclear Regulatory Authority, and the Kenya Hospital Authority Trust. Those are authorities. They are meant to look at oversight matters. Now, they're all categorized under State Department. Then we have the health sector support functions, which you know. You need to know the biovaccines. For vaccines, we have the Kenyan National Public Health Institute. Then we have the National Quality Control Laboratories, which helps us with laboratory work even for food products. And then we have the National Quality, the National Syndemic Disease Control. Previously, it was National AIDS Control. And then now we have a training institution for the State Department, which is Kenya Medical Training College. KMTC is created to educate or train health professionals for the Ministry of Health. Now we have other medical training institutions and colleges that also train in nutrition. But here, this is legally placed under the State Department. All these people have functions. And finally, that is the health sector policy framework. Attaining the highest possible standards of healthcare in a responsive manner, very broad, with specific objectives and specific principles. We must locate where we are as the academy. One key thing that Margaret Thatcher, when she was being interviewed, she talked about the issue of taxes. In fact, when she was taking up, the British was the worst taxed country. They were being taxed at 80%. And Margaret Thatcher was taking over. Then she came up with a policy to be able to strategically bring down the tax from 80 to 60 to 50 As that we talk, Britain has a tax, it is still one of the highest, at about 45. And her argument was, when tax is brought down, then you increase the buying power. Dr. K was using a simple one. When you impose tax, for example, on food items, take, for example, eggs or fish, as you have indicated, and this fish is actually being eaten by families, what does it translate to? Is that the cost that you have impacted actually is going to drive that cost higher. And then it means that family is not going to be able to buy that food item. And therefore, the nexus part of it is that people will not be able to take rich protein or foods rich in protein diet, isn't it? And that the implication will be protein malnutrition or protein undernourishment, isn't it? That will be the implication. But you see, these guys are not able to see that. It needs the minds that are sitting here to be able to talk about it based on policy nexus or meta-analysis, which Dr. K was talking about, being able to interrelate that. The stages of making a policy are key. But as it has been indicated, it begins with needs assessment. And the needs assessment will be able to inform which kind of policy gaps. That needs assessment is not only focused on basic research, but it also focuses on even analyzing the existing policy. Policy briefs in their own orientation are not just necessarily for one particular policy, but you can do policy briefs on even specific articles based on your analysis of the existing policy. The issue of policy initiation can be by all of us. And when I say all of us, simply means that even those of us who are not in positions of authority can be able to initiate policies. I think I will not repeat that because Dr. K had already talked about it. One of the key aspects in policy initiation is actually evidence-based. And evidence-based simply means you must do specific research that is oriented to that. You realize that when you will be doing policy brief, one of the key components in the policy brief is basically something referred to as analysis or situation analysis. That situation analysis is actually guided by the research. It is the research that will actually be able to drive that component. It is expected that as a policy advisor, you'll be able to do a research to be able to inform the policy gaps that you are expecting to change. Somebody to take charge of that. I was saying that I meet from this side, but I think it is an additional job. Somebody else to take charge of that. I can see they are coming in numbers. So taking a research is going to help us be able to deeply understand those research gaps that you are able to fill. Now, this has to be done by experts. The experts are the ones who are able to come up with the specific objectives to be able to identify those gaps. And that is very critical. Once you're through with that, you do what we refer to as public participation. Actually, this has been put in our constitution, that there will be no policy that you can come up with without engaging the public. It is not just a requirement, but it should be actually inbuilt in many of the aspects of the policy. In Parliament, this has been placed as, I think, after second reading. Once a document has been committed to the committee stage, then one of the key aspects is that the publication will go out and people will be invited to be able to submit their memoranda submissions based on that particular policy. Now, that is an aspect that can never be missed. One of the key reasons of policy negotiation is to be able to listen to the public and what they are actually thinking over it. Sometimes we may come up with a policy that you as an individual think
that it is going to provide any solution, only to realize that it is not even in the first place priority. But as Dr. K had put it, sometimes most of the policy are driven by those sitting in the office, and they will find a way of manipulating the public to make it a need. They generate a need for themselves, but ideally it is supposed to come from the people. Now, the reasons for engaging the public in policy negotiation is to be able to ensure that you have a wider acceptance of the policy as much as possible. Recently, one of the key policies that affected us as nutritionists, but I know many of you did not even submit a memorandum, is this thing called the regulation of breast substitute. How many of you are aware? Those in the hospital are aware, definitely aware of it, because they have been hit so hard. That regulation was a problem to us, and Dr. Keyo will tell you that we really fought. We wrote actually a serious memorandum to the cabinet secretary. Before, forget about this one here. It was Kagwe. And he ignored. Then we went ahead and we were called by Parliament in Mombasa, the legislative committee, the delegated legislative committee or Senate, and we met them there. We met the CA, or we met somebody, professor who was chairing that committee. We asked her very hard questions. On what basis were they coming up with that, and especially trying to limit nutrition? If you read that regulation very clearly, I'm bringing it because it is very relevant to you. It's actually limiting nutritionists from accessing knowledge, because they even want to control the publications through a group which is being, Dr. K is a part of that committee, the executive. They are called the Breast Milk Substitute Advisory Committee. Now, this committee wants to even check on which papers we are generating from the university, as if, other than Dr. K, many of them, more than 50%, do not even understand how a paper is generated. They have never generated a manuscript. Because if you generate a manuscript, we will see, isn't it? It's public. You'll see it in Google Scholar, you'll see it. Somebody who has never generated a manuscript wants to check what a manuscript we have generated from the university is. Dr. K, I think, had withdrawn. He has withdrawn from that committee. Very interesting. Are you getting what the problem we have? Now, based on that, go back to the practitioners, those of us in the clinical area. Do you know what that has meant to them? They are unable to purchase breast milk substitutes. Children are dying as they are watching, and they have no option, because that regulation denied them that right to be able to secure the products from products developers to be able to help these children. Now, whether they were engaged also, we don't know, because when we wrote that memorandum, were there any other memorandum? They must have not been engaged. And if they were engaged, they must have been ignored thoroughly, because the guys were interested in one thing. This thing is being driven. I'm sorry if some of our UNICEF team are here. There is a globalization war between UNICEF and Nestle, which we don't know where it's coming from. Because in New York, they are together in one office. In Kenya, they are fighting. In Kenyan soil there, to an extent that they are actually nurturing policies and affecting us. But Dr. K has advised a lot that we don't have to have UNICEF having an office in the Ministry of Health. Let them serve us, let them come here, we will talk. But when they want to develop policies, and then it is being guided by either an NGO or an individual, then you can see the problem. Now, this component of policy negotiation is supposed to bring everybody on board, but that did not happen. I'm just giving an example. From that, then you go to the next stage, which is finalization of the policy. And by the way, between the policy and the law, which comes first? It's actually it's actually the policy first, then the law. Previously, it was the law, then the policy is out of the law. As we talk, it is the policy first, then from the policy, then it graduates. Once it has been tested, it graduates into actually law. For example, Mwongozo, I know, Mwongozo has been a policy even to date, for those of you who are in governance. Today, I think there are working mechanisms on how to ratify Mwongozo and as an act of parliament. So those are some of the stages that we are engaged in when it comes to policy. This one was already canvassed. For any policy to function as a national policy, public policy, it has to be go through cabinet. Okay, so do not think that you will sit there. And this is why academia loses. For this to happen, it has to go through the very specific channels. I think it has been overemphasized that you must know the stages through which the policies must pass. Some of the problems that most of our academicians have, now I'm back to academicians, we are very naive about our situations, even around us, extremely naive. Somebody is imagining that because you have a PhD thing, so people will come and consult you. Forget it. They will not. Academicians must come up. Nutritionists, you must come up. You must not remain naive within your comfort zone in the universities. The only way to come up is to be able to do policy briefs. A policy brief in the structure, I think I'm going to provide with them a structure of doing a policy brief, but we have a very easy way of doing it because policy brief is not more than 2 pages. Actually, in terms of slides, they are not more than 5 slides. For those of you who have participated in impromptus, you meet a donor and you only have 1 minute with that donor. What key important issues you will present to that donor that makes them take your project or take your policy as an issue? Just 1 or 2. You don't need to write pages and pages. As it was emphasized already, even a picture and its explanation is just enough. You don't have to go. So we have technologies and techniques like picture charts. Those who IT guys, these young guys who are behind there, understand, who help us do this policy briefs in a very short time, but they must be guided by those areas that we've talked about. So the key deliverable here is that at the end of it all, you should be able to get from your researches that you've done and reduce it to just maximum of a page or 2. In other words, maximum of 5 slides to be able to generate and make it speak to the people. After cabinet approval, once it goes to cabinet, it comes back to parliament for those stages that were already canvassed, parliamentary stages, and then finally it goes to the Senate. There are other components which may not necessarily need to go to the president, and one of them are, we call them regulations. For example, here at Kenya Nutrition Adaptation Institute, we have developed a number of policies. There are, how many though? The policies, they are many. Yes. About, yes, we have about standard operating procedures, about 20, and then some 6 policies. Most of our policies, once they come from the council, then they go for gazetting. First, they are taken to state law office for gazetting. And that is when it now affects everybody. So some people have been thinking that, where are KNDA coming with these issues? I know we have had issues with our universities, but some of them had to reconcile that this is actually a national law and we have no option. So a sense, which is by the president, will basically focus on the act. Regulations will basically reach the ministerial level and then they are gazetted. So ministers can gazette and our CEOs also gazette. Like for KNDI, Dr. Keo and Dr. Evelyn Grikachi are the gazetting authorities. So most of our laws are gazetted in the Kenya State Law Office. Not most, all, including the charges, every single charge must be gazetted. Okay? So basically, up to that point, that is the end of the stages. I'll not go to issues of drafting the bill. I think those ones are, they are supported. So the principal benefit of public participation is just for general acceptance of the law once it comes out. Any law that is not properly canvassed by the people will be resisted, and somehow some people will go to court. Actually, that is why we are very careful of everything. I think we are the most sued, or we are also the most, we are the ones who have sued many times. And we have also sued thoroughly. So despite the fact that we are not really the oldest regulator, I think we have been baptized by fire. You have been sued by you people. Number of you have taken us to court. And we have also taken a number of you to court as well, and arrested quite some in the field. Those who do not have license have faced it, I know. But we are not doing it for the sake of it. We are doing it so that everybody conform. And you realize the regulatory law is actually mainly to ensure that everybody does what? Conform. If there were no laws, if there were no policies, I can assure you we would have lost all the cases. But by the grace of God, up to now, we have never lost a single case, even the hardest that were among us ourselves. Not even one case. So that is part of the reason why policies become very important.